we are recording this meeting. You probably just got a pop-up. So if you have issues with that, please let us know, or feel free to watch the recording later.
How are we looking?
Looks good. Thank you, Ari.
Great.
We can wait just a few minutes to get going. Riley, do you want to let me know when we're looking good on participants for getting started?
Why don't you get started at like 4:05 and I'll just let people in as they come.
Perfect. Sounds good. So for those of you who are waiting now, this is the part 2 of our Student Voices on Climate Futures series. We did do a part 1 back in, I want to say October of last year. It was a really powerful discussion. If you'd like to view that, it is up on our YouTube page, and we can share that link in the chat later. All right, let's go ahead and get started with introductions, and we can let more folks in as they get here. So welcome to everybody that's here. If you missed it before, we're asking that everybody turn their cameras off just to save our bandwidth and make sure that we don't have any connectivity issues. If you would like to introduce yourself, please do so in the chat. And please feel free to ask any questions. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end. So welcome, I'm Natalie Dreyer. I work at Brick Architecture, and I am the chair of the Portland chapter of Oregon Green Schools. We also have with us today Riley Loveland, who is the chair of Oregon Green Schools, and she'll be moderating the Q&A, and Ari Ettinger, who manages our Student Voices outreach and works for PPS, and he will be moderating the discussion today. So Oregon Green Schools is a statewide organization that really activates climate and sustainability leadership by providing an inclusive network and resources for students, schools, and communities. We reach out in all kinds of ways to interact with schools and to provide support and resources for students. So this is just one of our platforms in providing student voices. Here at the Portland Metro chapter, we really are promoting sustainability in school design and operation. We've really been focused on that design and construction side of sustainability, but we also are promoting advocacy and education of stakeholders. So some of our initiatives here at Portland include these Student Voices panels, where we try to really elevate and promote the voices and leadership of students. We're also recently partnering with Grow Portland to promote student gardens, and with the Architecture Foundation of Oregon to develop sustainable curriculum. We have monthly meetings on the second Friday of each month. Our next meeting is coming up on June 10th. So please reach out on social media. Let us know if you want to get involved. You can also email me to get involved, and I'll throw my email in the chat. and yeah, we look forward to seeing any of you at our meetings. Our social media handles are here. We can share these as well. Want to send out a big thank you to PAE engineers. I know we have Ruan on the line today, who is from PAE. They are supporting and sponsoring this event through providing monetary stipends for our students to participate. We really want to make sure that we get equitable engagement and support students in participating in these kinds of events outside of their academic lives. So huge thank you to PAE, and we have their website there if you'd like to engage with them. And at this point, I'm going to pass it off to one of our student presenters for today, Isa Swain, to provide a land acknowledgement.
Awesome, thank you. At this point in the program, we would like to give a land acknowledgement. Today, our land acknowledgement is intended to recognize the ongoing impacts of colonization that tribal communities continue to live with to this day. We ask you to consider supporting Indigenous communities by taking action. We ask that you give land back to tribes, protect the environment and salmon. Tribal cultures depend on them. Insist that the United States respect tribal sovereignty and uphold its trust responsibility to tribes, which includes appropriate levels of federal funding to support tribal needs. Many promises to tribes still need to be kept. Elect officials and judges who understand tribal governments, relationships, and law. Invest in tribal economies. Challenge and reject stereotypes about Indigenous peoples. Insist that students are taught accurate information about the histories, cultures, and contemporary lives of Indigenous peoples in public education, and inform yourself about issues impacting Indigenous communities and speak up. Thank you.
Thank you, Isa. So I think Ari is going to take it away at this point with our main discussion.
Wow, fabulous. Thank you, Isa. Thank you, Natalie, for kicking us off. Really appreciate everybody being here. We're really excited to have you and to have this this conversation. So why are we here today? For a number of reasons. Part of OGS's mission is to host these conversations and really elevate youth voices and priorities in the fight against climate change. So that's our number one purpose of being here, is to hear from young people what matters to them, what's impacting their daily lives around climate change, how are they getting involved, and what barriers do they face in getting involved in the fight against climate change. We know that there is a large amount of effectiveness of student voices at moving the needle on policy design and implementation. We've seen that right where I work at Portland Public Schools, when student voices are heard and brought to the table, the adults in the room tend to listen and act. So we know that if we as school communities and school districts want to push our policy design forward and ensure that the policies we do have are actually implemented, we need student voices in the room holding us accountable to do those things. We also we want to recognize the amazing work that students have been doing across the state, from hosting student climate marches, student climate summits, student climate fairs at individual schools. Over the last year and multiple years, really, we've seen just an incredible outpouring of effort and energy and passion from youth climate activists to really move these issues to the front of political discussions. And we want to just honor that and be a part of it. We want to continue to we want to continue to participate in that youth movement and really be a part of that. And then lastly, the more we know, this is a genuine opportunity for the adults here in the room, whether you're a teacher, a school administrator, a climate professional in some way. this is this is an opportunity to learn from young people about about what are their priorities for the fight against climate change. How can we support those priorities? How can we support uplifting youth actions as they progress sort of in their young careers as activists within school walls, especially? How can we make sure that we're educating in the right way, that we're bringing up the right topics in the right ways, and that we are supporting youth voices and youth activism within schools. So really excited to have this conversation and just to sit back and ask some questions of these amazing young activists and to learn through that conversation. And as Natalie said, we want everyone to have an opportunity to ask questions as well. So if you have questions, pop them into the chat, and Riley is going to keep track of those. If something is really topical and on point for that moment in the conversation, she'll just go ahead and throw it in. We might get to some questions at the end as well. So we're just going to kind of naturally let this conversation flow. So really quickly, just want to introduce the panelists who are here today. Thank you for being here. We have a diverse group of folks from across Oregon, which we're really excited about. So in alphabetical order by first name, we've got Chloe Rambo, who's from Central Point, and has done some great work leading solar projects at her high school for her senior project. Danny Cage from PPS, who is the PPS Policy Committee Student Council representative, and we're excited because we definitely want to talk about the PPS climate policy that just passed, and Danny played a big role in that. Issa Swain, who read our land acknowledgement from North Salem High School, regional leader for Our Future Oregon, founder and president of the North Salem High School Environmental Club. JJ Klein Wolf, who is from Portland Public Schools, involved in the Sunrise Movement and the Portland Youth Climate Summit that I mentioned. Liam Castles, who's also from PPS and does great work with Sunrise and the Portland Youth Climate Collective. And Lucy Gregg from Portland Public Schools, who is leading a project at McDaniel High School called the Climate Justice Vision. So as I promised, a really phenomenal group of students. So I'm going to stop sharing because, as the slides are telling us, we are into the discussion. So I will go back to the panelists' view, and we'll jump right into it. We have a spacious amount of time here. We've got till 5:30, so we're gonna kind of dive into some details of questions. We're gonna kind of zoom out and go high level. We can we can hear from different people on the same issues. We can circle back to issues if we need to. So we've got lots of time and opportunity to chat about this. So let me pull up my questions and we will get going. Okay, so as we kick off, it'd be great if for your first time speaking, if you can just repeat your names, say hello, and if you have pronouns you'd like us to use or anything else you'd like us to know just that first time you go. I'm just going to start off with a question that I'm really curious about, which is all of you have taken on this role as sort of being a climate activist, and I'd love to know what event or person or experience at some point in your life kind of led you down this path of being passionate about climate change and wanting to be an activist in that field. And I don't even know where to start, but I'm just so excited to hear from all of you. But Chloe, how about we start with you?
Yeah, hello, my name is Chloe Rambo. As already said, I live in Central Point. I'm a senior at Crater High School. My pronouns are she, her. So what event led me to be interested in climate? I would say growing up, I would see different campaigns like a recycling campaign, or maybe something through my mom's a fourth grade teacher, and maybe a project she was doing with her class. So I was always kind of cognizant about some campaigns and climate activists. But then when I really started to get into it was when I started to read. I love reading and I venture through a lot of different topics. So when I started to read about climate, I started to understand there's more to it than like plastic bags and plastic straws. There's more to it. It's more about cement and carbon emissions and stuff like that. So I think when I started to grasp really the scale is when I started to get into it, because it wasn't just like a little thing someone could do. It's big, it's institutional. So that's when I thought this is something I want to be involved in, because it's on such a grand scale that how could you not?
Right on. Danny, how about you? Something in your life that that kind of led you down this path of being a climate activist?
Yeah, that one's a hard one for me. I've always like really been drawn to climate. I believe that we should all have clean air and clean water as a basic human right. But um, I was really kind of like inspired a lot by the sunrise movement, just like, I don't know, seeing like it's, in New York, it's in Portland, it's in Houston, it's everywhere. That youth are coming together and organizing collectively. And that kind of just seeing them not just in here in Portland, but seeing them collectively across the state, you know, organizing not just what we see in like urban areas, but also seeing youth organizing in rural areas, which is really important and is often missed. And just, I was following along heavily, and kind of after following along with like the Sunrise movement, kind of like grown into the Sunrise Portland chapter, and then from there kind of just grew.
Great. Liam, I see you nodding along. Why don't you jump in?
Yeah, no, I just with both Chloe and Danny's stories, I have a lot of similarities. I feel like I know I also grew up with a lot of sort of climate or carbon emissions related things, I guess. I know OMSI, the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, was part of that. I think just as a very little kid, it sort of got its way into my head that this is something that's important. And then it was, I think, during planning for the September 24th strike in Portland, where I had just switched schools, and because that schedule changed, it had a lot more free time to put to where I wanted it to, and for me that was climate issues. I found the school leads for the strike there, and helped them put up posters, and was out there every morning for that last week before the strike, that Friday, with signs and talking with them. And there were a couple of people there who were interested in getting more involved as well. And I think a lot of my interest in doing that came from the fires and the smoke. And I know since then I've had a couple of conversations with my parents that go like, if you're going to keep living in Portland for the next 20 years, this is going to start happening all the time. And I think that realization in a lot of ways was scary, because ultimately that is how I think climate change will affect Portland, is primarily through fires and smoke. And we aren't prepared for that. So from there, I applied for a position with Portland Youth Climate Collective, which plans the Portland Youth Climate Strike. So JJ and I worked together on that, and planned a wonderful strike there that was great momentum building. And then from there, partway through that process, I applied to be part of Portland Youth Climate Strike as the group that plans the strikes. And I've been working with them for the past 5 or 6 months.
Fabulous. Cool. Lucy, how about you?
Yeah, Lucy, she, her pronouns. I guess for me, like probably the biggest thing is I've always like really loved nature and like spending time in the outdoors. And kind of like Liam said, like seeing the wildfires and all the air pollution and stuff that we're experiencing, like it's really definitely caused a lot of kind of anxiety for me. And so I guess in the last couple of years, just like kind of trying to get involved however I can. And it definitely took a while, like for me to realize that I could get involved in those things because I never really felt like, I don't know, I like feel like I'm just a kid and like I don't really, I can't really understand these things or can't really get involved in these things. But one thing that definitely helped is at my school taking the climate justice elective, which is taught by Mr. Tree, who I think is actually here. And that was definitely really eye-opening for me because in that class, there were a lot of other youth that had like very similar interests to me. And just kind of the discussions we had and things we learned about were really important. That was definitely like really eye-opening. So yeah.
That's great. JJ, how about you?
Oh, sorry there. Hi, my name is JJ. I use she, her pronouns. This is a loaded question. I think that for the number of times I've been asked this, I probably should have an answer more prepared, but it's kind of always ebbing and flowing and changing. But I think that the biggest reason that I'm in activism is not the reason that I have stayed in activism. I think that like I really care, you know, like everyone said about nature, about the planet, about all these things, and that it's been instilled in me as a value from such a young age that as soon as I got into high school in fall of 2020, I was like, you know what? This is the time. This is when I'm old enough to really start to get involved and to do all these things. So, you know, I kind of applied and put out sort of just activism feelers everywhere with Sunrise Movement, Portland Youth Climate Strike, Portland Youth Climate Summit, all sorts of groups. And it was really awesome to, you know, be surrounded by this community of people who really just care about this stuff. And it really sort of lit this fire under me to start activism. But, you know, I probably speak for everyone when I say that it's not all like sunshines and rainbows, that it's really difficult to stay in this work. And I've had some experiences that have sort of made me question, you know, why I'm still here, why I still want to do this. And like I was working with PPS for a while on the climate justice youth advisory. And it's just sort of felt like I was running into a wall with all these different things I wanted to do and that we were trying to achieve, and that nothing was really working. And it was because the voices that were being heard were not those of the students and the youth. And then I sort of started to find new outlets and new activism groups that were really, really focused on the youth, and that I was working with adults that really understood that, you know, we're more of the future than they are, and that we are the voices that need to be centered, and all these things that sort of made me realize that I may have started activism because I cared so much about the planet. But now I'm sort of caring more about the voices of the future getting heard, and that, you know, the planet is still being preserved and all these things, but that us as students are really given the opportunity to share our voices on these really important issues.
Isa, I'm going to come to you in 1 second, but JJ, I just want to follow up with something which is, you know, so you get to high school, you start putting out activism feelers. I mean, I feel like that's what I did when I was like 28. I'm just wondering, like, how did you find out about a place like Sunrise or Portland Youth Climate Collective? Is that a social media thing?
It's a lot of, I mean, each experience in its own and finding an activism group is unique. I found out about Sunrise from a family friend who had been organizing with them. And he was like, I've known you since you've grown up, and I think that you would fit in really well with this group. And so he told me to reach out to Sunrise. But then for Portland Youth Climate Summit, that was mostly from social media. So I, saw that they were taking applications for this stipended group to plan this event, and I applied to that. And then there's like my most favorite way of getting involved with activism is the sort of accidental ways, is that I became part of Portland Youth Climate Strike because a friend of mine in Sunrise was like, hey, you'd be awesome at this. Come work with us. And so that kind of pushed me to be part of that group.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm going to circle back to some of those points again too, because I hear you, mentioning that being involved through Portland Public Schools had its challenges, and I'd love to hear more about what that looked like. And I also hear you talking about, there's this feeling, this beneficial feeling of, taking on this fight in community, and that you sort of feel that community through Sunrise, and thinking maybe creatively about how we can kind of build that activist climate community, within PPS as well, and kind of give students an opportunity to feel that, acting as sort of PPS climate activists. So that's great. Isa, what about you? How did you end up down this road?
So can you guys hear me? Does it sound better?
That's better. Yeah,
okay.
That's great.
So I'm Isa. I use she, her pronouns, and I would say for me, I've been very passionate about just helping out the environment for my whole life. I've been, I particularly remember one of my mentors at an outdoor garden club, just teaching me about how ecosystems interact, and I just remember feeling very inspired by that. But with climate activism, I think for the majority of my life, I've been motivated to do things through guilt and anxiety, which has not been the most productive way for me to actually connect with other people in my community and do meaningful systemic change or systemic work. And then once I realized that those emotions weren't helping me or the people around me, I kind of I shifted my view of it. And I think it helped. I read a book called A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety, and it helped me reframe my perspective on climate activism and on climate action. And also talking to a teacher, I was expressing my frustration about how all the things that are happening with in the world, and just how I view the future just being very bad. And he was like, well, why aren't you doing something about it? And that kind of made me feel, or it wasn't, he didn't say he was more well, what can you do in this community? What can you do in the school? And so I think that kind of helped me move towards starting the environmental club and joining Our Future. And that's been very helpful for me. So
that's great. Thank you all. This is wonderful. Lucy, I heard you mention the climate justice elective at your school as being sort of a catalyst for you, at least recently. And I guess I would just, I heard lots of just a huge variety of things, from giving voice to young people to love of nature, to sort of equity and rights, to clean air, things like that. And these are all, I love all the life experiences. I just want to know, maybe show of hands, how many of you could say that at some point in your schooling, at some point through a class that you were in, or a teacher that you had, all the way back to elementary school, how many of you would say that there was some moment in your schooling where you learned about something that kind of also helped kind of initiate you into this climate activist role? Right on. Yeah. Chloe, are you?
Yeah, I don't think I've had anything through like my schooling in the school district that none of our curriculum really focuses around that. Maybe that's a different in areas in Oregon.
Right.
We haven't ever had a climate class or anything really breaching that subject. I learned about it through different avenues, but never through school, which is kind of interesting to see people have climate class and stuff.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, I know. I still remember a 5th grade project doing a moon journal every night, writing about the moon, and it's that kind of thing that I know helped me get into this work. Lucy, I'm wondering if maybe you want to expand a little bit on just what that class has been like and how it's enabled you to really go deeper with your exploration of climate justice and climate activism.
Yeah, so I actually took that class last year online, and I wasn't really sure what to expect going into it. But something that I definitely really appreciated is how much focus there was on like local issues. Because I feel like sometimes people can think of climate change as something that's really like far out or not really happening here. But definitely like, we started the school year last year during like the peak of the wildfires. And so definitely talking about that and just kind of more like local issues within Portland and Oregon, I feel like was really helpful for me and other students. And then also just kind of talking about like the intersections between climate change and people experiencing discrimination and environmental racism was definitely really interesting and helpful because we had a lot of meaningful discussions, and I feel like I learned a lot in there that I hadn't really considered before when I thought about climate justice or environmentalism, because I know like how some other people mentioned is like when I was little, I mainly thought about it as like Earth Day and like not using plastic and stuff like that. And so like I didn't really, I don't know, that definitely kind of really opened my eyes to issues that are happening here. And I feel like that was really helpful. So.
Yeah, Danny, you mentioned people's right to clean air, right? That was you, yes. And yeah, I'm just wondering if you maybe have anything to add there too, because I thinking about sort of that complexity of as you get older and into high school, and climate change isn't just about sea turtles and polar bears, but it becomes this issue of people's rights to safe and clean environments. And I'm just wondering if kind of where that answer came from, because I think that's really interesting, and just what else you might want to add to that.
Yeah, in the way that I view climate change and climate justice, I mean, the way that I view a lot of like these issues around human rights or equity is that we're all owed this. There's no reason that we, a planet full of humans, can't give each other human rights. Seems kind of silly sometimes, but it reminds me of a conversation I had with students, and I told them the same way, is that, when we talk about climate change, like it is a right to have clean water, it is a right to have clean air. I view a healthy planet as something that we as individuals are owed from our elected officials, from our government, and that's something that they need to deliver. A lot of times we view things as luxuries, like having clean water is a luxury, or having electricity is a luxury, or an AC. you know, AC that can be used to help prevent people from, you know, dying when it's 100 and something degrees inside their house. But I view these things as like basic human rights that we all should be afforded to.
Right on. Anybody else? I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, but I want to make sure if anyone else wants to kind of chime in on you know, something school related that that really just sticks out in their memory.
I remember a project we did in, I want to say 7th or 8th grade, that was basically you had to take an issue of climate change, environmental justice, sustainability, something, and you had to find an issue and then create a solution for it, and then give a whole presentation to the whole class about, you know, why this issue is bad, and then what our product does to resolve it. And so the more I think about it, the more I realize that like that was one of the first times I had interacted with environmental justice and climate change as something that isn't just like, oh, it's happening, we got to accept it, and more of something like, oh, I could actually, you know, difference. And so I think that like from that young of an age at 12, 13, being taught that like you can do something to combat climate change and you can sort of take initiative is really, really valuable to people that want to become activists, but also just people that want to be good global citizens.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so switching gears slightly from kind of, you know, what brought us to this point. I'm really curious. I think everybody would love to kind of hear some stories, some hands-on stories about, you know, what climate activism has looked like for you all. And I know a lot of you have been involved outside of school, and would love to hear about that too. But also, you know, anything you're doing within your school walls, you know, whether that's, you know, putting up posters or signs about climate change, trying to get other students involved, you know, applying for grants, organizing climate fairs, all of these things are fair game. I know that you've all done some of this work, so I can kind of just maybe open it up to whoever wants to jump in and kind of let us know what you've done, what your experience has been around being a youth climate activist.
Wait, sorry, never mind. You can go first.
Issa, you want to jump in?
Okay.
Sure. Sorry. Sure. I'll start. So I kind of started climate activism this year. Like that's been my main focal point outside of school this year. So I first joined or started the environmental club, and then my our advisor told me about Our Future. And then through joining Our Future, they've been giving me tons of resources and help with our school project, which has been implementing a commercial composting system, which our school didn't have before. And we tried to take into account educating and inspiring and motivating our peers to be a part of it, so that we can create a culture that will be maintained for the future, and so that the system stays permanent for future years. And I'm also looking forward to continuing to work with Our Future over the summer and working on some more district and regional projects.
Can you tell us a little bit about what Our Future is?
Yes. So they're called Our Future Oregon, and they're a network that like just started last year, and they are working to connect high schoolers across Oregon to work on climate justice and climate action in high schools, and to basically create that network of high school students through Zoom and mostly like online spaces.
Okay, right on. And is it organized by fellow high schoolers, or?
It's organized by Partners for Sustainable Schools. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, love that. I'm going to circle back to you about this environmental club. I have some questions around, how to encourage your peers to get involved. So environmental club, I think, is a prime example of that. Lucy, I know you were going to jump in. I think many of you might have stories.
Yeah, I can share next if that.
Yeah, please do.
So I guess like my experiences with like activism mainly started last year. Again, I was taking the climate justice elective, and I had just picked up our environmental club after the person who used to lead it graduated. And while I was taking the elective and working on our eco club, Mr. Tree, who teaches climate justice, shared with me about this grant from the Portland Clean Energy Fund that is working to fund projects from local organizations that either work on workforce development or infrastructure related to climate justice and sustainability. And so we actually spent the past year designing a project for our school that will be funded by PSEF that works to create climate justice related curriculum, specifically within our CTE or career technical education courses that would prepare our students for careers related to climate justice and sustainability outside high school. And kind of another special thing about that project is that if we receive the grant, our curriculum design process is going to be done as a community process. So we're going to do listening sessions and surveys and really spend time talking to students and community members, which I'm excited about, but we're still waiting on the grant. So
That's amazing. That's great. Does anyone else want to chime in about sort of what their activism has looked like, kind of in like an on the ground kind of way? Like give us some insight into what work have you done? What has that looked like? What's it felt like?
I'd be happy to talk about this. So like I work with Portland Youth Climate Strike, and we helped plan the big strike that happened on May 20th. And my biggest job was, well, two things. One, managing social media and creating those posts, and then also establishing a connection with individuals at each major Portland and Portland metro area high school, so they could help sort of promote the strike at their school. So like, for example, Lucy was actually the McDaniel lead for the strike. And I did a lot of work, communicating with this network of 20 plus school leads to make sure they could hang up flyers, get the word out, create bus routes to the strike. And it really, paid off when students started to pour in 2 Fridays ago. And we ended up having like thousands and thousands of students just from all over, the Portland area that were there to support sort of this movement. So to go back to the whole, like, what does it look like to organize sort of on the ground? And in reality, it's hard. It's really, really challenging if you want to create something of a large impact. And it takes it sounds cliche, but it really does take a village. Like we had the 20 school leads plus, 15 core organizers plus 30 plus community organizations that were promoting our strike. So it's hard to be the first person to reach out and be like, hey, I don't know who you are, you don't know who I am, but I want you to help organize this strike. And it's really hard to sort of do that the first time, but then that's sort of how you create friendship, like I have, with Lucy and Liam.
That's great. I mean, I love that. This is like in so many ways, just good old fashioned organizing, just making that call, like you said, and putting that work into it. That's great. Liam, what about you? I saw you leaning into this answer.
Yeah. I appreciate everything JJ said. I was on, I'm also part of PYCS, Portland Youth Climate Strike. I was in charge of outreach to politicians about signing the climate pledge and setting up logistically like the board. So if you look at news photos, you can see a big board in front of City Hall from the strike. I know I did a lot of work with the strike leads for Cleveland in the days preceding the strike, both for the September 24th strike and for the May 20th strike. And for me, that looked like a lot of poster hanging. And I spent one of my free periods going class to class, talking about the strike, asking teachers if we could go in and have a moment, and trying to hit as many people as we can. And that's really hard because teachers don't want to give up their class time, and a lot of them support the cause, so they're willing to or whatever. But trying to reach every student and trying to reach them on a meaningful level is nearly impossible when you have 4 kids trying to talk to 1,700. So I'm always blown away by the work that organizers at particular schools do. And while I have been lucky to have the ability and the time to help out, I've not taken a leadership role in school specific work. I've been working more with PYCS on a larger level, but the amount of effort that it takes to run something like that is immense, and I'm always so grateful for them.
PYCS, they have there's some older, there's some like PSU students involved with that as well, right? Or is it?
There is not. PYCS is specifically high school.
All high school. Wow. Okay.
Ari, I think you might be confusing Portland Youth Climate Strike and Portland Youth Climate Summit.
Okay.
Which are both organizations that Liam and I work on.
Okay.
Very confusing, the combination Portland Youth Climate something. But yes, Portland Youth Climate is with PSU students as well.
Gotcha. That's good to know. And have you both felt like getting to work some with college students is beneficial to kind of help teach about some of those organizing principles?
Yeah. I think, I don't want to speak for Liam, but I think it's really beneficial to talk with older, quote unquote, older adults who sort of have, maybe not a background in organizing, but sort of have a better understanding of like how much things cost for events, or how much time we should be spending planning things. And it's also really nice to be in a space with 20-something-year-olds who kind of are starting to realize that the teenagers should be the voices that should be centered, but they're also really strong and positive adults and role models that can advocate for us when some people won't listen to teenagers.
Right on. Chloe, if you're going to jump in, go for it. I have another question to pitch to you, but if you were about to go, let's go for
I'd
it.
like to talk about my project some.
Absolutely.
So my school district received a bond in 2019 that mostly focused on upgrades around school facilities, and we also constructed a new building. So last summer, I kind of was talking to my dad. He's in the district management, and I was talking to him about maybe for my senior project, I could work with the bond manager, and we were kind of toying around with ideas. I'm super interested in economics, and I see that as a powerful way to have an impact on climate. Like where you're allotting money. JJ just mentioned, how much is stuff costing? Is this feasible? And I think that's a really important part. Like if we want to start applying these positive climate ideas, is it going to work out? Are the numbers going to crunch? Whatever people want to say, that's an important part of making sure climate ideas are working. So I contacted the bond manager, and I also started talking to Jerry, which he's in this meeting today. So hi, Jerry. And he's from a company called Amoresco, and we started meeting about what could this project focus on. And Oregon has a bill called Get 1.5 that says any public facility that construction costs exceed $5 million, 1.5 of the total construction costs need to go to integration of green technology. And I like policy and I like economics, so I thought that would be a really great avenue to go. And from the get-go, I told Jerry and Spencer, the bond manager, if this doesn't work out, like if the numbers don't work, if this isn't financially feasible, I understand that, but I want to be here for the process of, analyzing how would solar panels look on our high school? What would be the efficiency of like how much would our rebates be? Would the numbers match up after 20 years of these solar panels running? So Jerry and I we were working pretty closely for many months. Unfortunately, when we were making these decisions, I think inflation was at 8.5%. The price of wood had about quadrupled. So when we were doing these calculations, solar panels, they just weren't feasible. And it was pretty upsetting. I mean, to say, oh, this isn't going to work. Like we're going to need to apply to not follow this policy or not comply. So the project didn't work out. I learned more than I could have even asked for, which is pretty amazing. And I can talk about that later, but the process of seeing how is this policy being applied? How is taxpayer money being spent? Is this going to work out? Because I live in a pretty conservative area, and sometimes I'll read about climate projects in urban, more progressive areas, but I've never seen them applied in my community. And so maybe there was that conflict there.
That's great. I'm going to come back to you in one sec, Chloe. But before I do, Danny, I'm just wondering if you want to chime in at all. I know you've had a kind of a unique experience in terms of how you've been involved through the PPS policy committee work. And I'm really interested for you to tell us a little bit about that, maybe give a brief background on what the PPS climate policy is and what that process looked like from your vantage point.
Before I do, Chloe, that's so cool. Bonds are super important, one for our schools, but including climate components in it are one vital and necessary. But bond work is not easy, so like I want to applaud you for that, because bond work is not it's not an easy task.
Thank you, Danny.
Money management is not an easy task in public education. So yeah, awesome.
Hey, Danny, I really appreciate that. And that reminds me, if any of you guys have follow-up questions for each other, take precedent over me, just, jump in and boy, if I don't say another word till we're done and you all just have your own conversation, that's fine with me. So feel free to jump in with follow-ups, but yes, go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, so the climate policy, the climate crisis response policy, is this big overarching policy that was recently passed a couple months ago in Portland Public Schools. and it has a whole bunch of different components with both educational components. So, there's a lot of talk on how we make climate leaders. One of the important parts of that is actually creating curriculum and building the infrastructure that allows supports for our teachers and educators. One of the struggles that we have is that we go, oh, you're supposed to teach climate change, but don't actually provide climate curriculum with that, which can host so many issues if teachers don't have fallback supports. So addressing some of that. It has like green infrastructure, electrification of our buildings, our VEETs. We have getting our net zero goals in PPS. And so a lot of different overarching things. What's really important is, one, this policy has been an idea floating around in PPS for a really long time. So the fact that it's passed is historic, because I've had conversations with PSU students who are, freshmen or sophomores, and they're like, oh, that's finally passed. I remember when I was a Portland Public School student advocating for that. So the fact that it's passed and now it's in written word is super amazing. But my role around that was, one, as a policy committee member, a lot of conversations into, staff worked on this heavily, and really shepherd this, but also keeping a student perspective in it, because sometimes we don't, staff mean 100%, usually all the time, with good ideas and good intent. We don't always see eye to eye because, sorry, where they are and where I am are two different spots, and we kind of live two different worlds a lot of times. And so having that student perspective on what's necessary, the student components and student ideas on this policy, and then also connecting a lot with Sunrise. Sunrise PDX was, as a member of Sunrise and also a member of the policy committee, I kind of like leveraged that this kind of like two different duo dynamic, of being like, hey, this is what's happening, or debriefing with Sunrise PDX folks. And then using Sunrise PDX and, the team that was committed on this to kind of like target different areas and, push PPS. There were, letter writing campaigns that we did for different things, and, walk-ins and different action minded events that Sunrise did. And being so closely connected with the policy allowed me to just personally move this forward.
That is so incredible. I mean, I love hearing about that work, and also just, that experience of connecting your work within PPS to your sort of more maybe progressive activist work with Sunrise, and how you were able to not just have those exist in separate spheres, but how you were able to bring those together and kind of use them to influence each other. Let's see.
Hey, Ari, can I butt in with a question?
Yes, yeah, please go for it, Riley.
So there's a question in here from Ingrid, specifically for Danny. If you can give a super quick overview, like the highlights, example actions of the PPS policy that passed for the benefit of her 13-year-old daughter listening in. And I thought that would be a nice little segue.
Yeah. I mean, one of my first things I'm thinking of is the education component. I had the pleasure of working with our tech coaches in PPS and doing civic engagement, both teaching, so busing into classrooms around PPS, specifically a lot in Northeast and Southeast, and teaching about this. And one of the things was, I saw overall disparities around what climate education looked like. There were some classrooms where I was amazed at what students had pulled together. So we had they had oh, this is what the polar bears are happening, and we had students were telling me about fracking, which some facts I didn't even know about fracking, and Northwest Naturals, and this student was really into Northwest Naturals and all the things that they'd done. They were 9 years old, so I was like, holy shoot, the fact that you know all this about Northwest Naturals and I don't, wow. But I also went to other places where the teacher had all the teachers collectively said they didn't have a lot to fall back on. But I went to other places and the teachers didn't have a lot to fall back on. They didn't have the time or the resources to put together climate-based education for their students. And this was one of the benefits that when I talked to educators in PPS that they appreciated, was having something that they could fall back on. Curriculum is super important, and also the resources to teach our students are super important. One of the other things that I think is super cool with the PPS policies, the Climate Crisis Response Committee. It's an open committee for basically anyone, and it's going to have different community members and 2 student spots collected, 2 separate spots for students. And so they're open to anyone. I would advise anyone, who's interested to apply to that, especially a young student like yours, because being able to be engaged in their education and make decisions about their education is super impactful and powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we have we'll have a link to that application actually at the end of this meeting to share with everyone, Danny. So thanks for plugging that. Yeah, Isa, what's up?
I would just like to add that there's an organization called Oregon Educators for Climate Education. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they are partners with Our Future, and they have been reaching out to us to hear about what their goals are to create a curriculum for K through 12 schools, and implement legislation so that schools there's laws that tell schools to teach about climate education. And so they have recently developed some basic standards that they want their curriculum to meet. So I can send more information about that if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be great. Maybe we can, after this meeting, we can kind of put together, compile a list of resources and organizations that you all mentioned, and we can all collectively put that together and get it out to everyone. So I want to ask, and this is partly for my sake because this is my job. And Chloe, I'm going to start with you, and then we can kind of swing it around. But how can teachers and school leaders and school district staff, how can we do a better job of supporting students in becoming climate activists, being climate literate, whatever that may be, and really put on your sort of creative and big picture hats here. I mean, just what can you possibly imagine that we can do that would really help spur this work forward and help make you feel more supported?
Yeah, so listening to some of the other panelists, I'm slightly jealous, I'll admit. You guys have a lot of cool community clubs and stuff you can join, which that isn't something that's offered at my school, or even really in many communities close to me. So there's definitely room for that type growth in my community. But in regards to school and education, I think Danny couldn't have been more spot on when we talked about curriculum, right? What does that look like in a school? And to me, from my experience in messaging in my type area, is is it sustainable? Is this going to last a while, right? Like, is this curriculum, it can't be something that maybe you do for a month or that takes an extraordinary amount of time to teach each class. Is a teacher going to want to do this? Is it going to be feasible for them? Is it going to be, I don't want to say easy, right? But is it going to be, are they going to be able to continue doing this for a while? And I also think, something that messaging that isn't swayed one way or the other, right? Let's talk about the science of solar panels. That's something that, is undeniable. You talking about some specific, science of this or the facts and data of this. To me, that's important. And that messaging, I think, would work anywhere, right? I would have liked to have a class where I learned about solar panels and carbon emission, more of a science-based class. I think that would be really impactful, and messaging like that, I think would work anywhere, which is what we need.
Mm-hmm. JJ?
Yeah. I think that, PPS is already starting to do a lot of really beneficial things for the climate crisis and also student activism, and just all of that together. I think we do have to remember, though, that we need to applaud PPS even for just offering the opportunity to have the climate crisis class or the climate justice class. Even if not enough students forecast for it at every school, they're still having it as an option to take. And I think that there's a lot to be said for why not enough students are forecasting for the class. And I think that it kind of goes with what someone said in the chat about channeling climate propaganda and climate change denial into activism. I think that there's not a whole lot of education done at the start of there's just not a whole lot of beginner level education done on climate change. I know for myself, I was starting to learn about the Youth versus ODOT campaign and why the freeway expansions are bad. And I think that and I was getting into, this whole thing and reading a whole bunch of stuff. And it took me, 7 or 8 articles to finally sort of realize that I had a full grasp of why these things were bad. But I think that if we start education a lot sooner on climate change, on things that are just here's the things that are right now in your city contributing to climate change, and getting that in schools, in middle schools, that'll really benefit students for developing an interest in environmental activism, and then also, hopefully getting kids to forecast for this class to take the climate change class in the future. So I think that there's a lot to be said for the fact that this class is just getting offered. I think it's really awesome. But then with that, I think there's still a lot more that can be done. Like I had said, I was part of the Climate Justice Youth Advisory that basically took 2 years to try and get off the ground. And granted, it was during the pandemic, so it was a completely different sort of scenario with how organizing and student engagement was going. But it was really hard to be working as a student in this, climate justice, climate change group that wasn't able to work with the PPS head of the climate. Ari, I don't know if you know what the name of the position is, but it's PPS head of climate change or something.
Yeah, we have a climate justice advisor.
Yeah.
That might be what you're thinking of. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I actually sat on the panel to interview the new person that's in that position. But when I went back to the student engagement specialist for PPS that was running the Climate Justice Youth Advisory, she kind of said well, I don't really think that this person is going to be working with you guys. And I kind of sat there is that not the whole point of their job? It just made sense to me that, these students are working on the Climate Justice Youth Advisory, that the person who was the head of PPS Climate Advisory would work. So I think that there is a lot more progress that needs to be made on engaging students, and then also making sure that the opportunities for giving students are sort of fair and don't come across as performative, as you're going to be working with the right people, doing the right change, making the right progress, and doing those.
How can we engage? How can we do a better job engaging students? One question I have is like, do all of you have an environmental or like climate change club at your school that you can join? Yeah, I see some nods and some no's. Like, is that a good place to just say, at the very least, every school has one of these, or, how do we build those connections in a more effective and consistent way where we're having real conversations with students?
Yeah,
I just want to chime into something that you're talking about. I'm reading a really good book right now. It's Black Lives Matter at School. It goes through the framework of how to make Black Lives matter at school, and addressing structural racism and addressing our system of schooling. And what's really interesting is the author goes through, why a lot of our things don't work in school. And something I've been thinking about constantly is, she mentions that the school system, we do so much now in the school system. It wasn't made for what we're trying to do. And so that a lot of times when we come into these issues of, it's talking about how, we've had open racially schools for 50 plus years, and yet we have still high racial dynamics. But as she goes through the book, she talks about schools were really made to they're connected to capitalism, and they're connected to being an instrument of capitalism. And she goes on a long time, but she really just talks about how it will be hard, because what we're doing, until we really rethink the school system and pull it policy by policy, and pull it system by system, the school system was really not meant to center student voice at all, because it is a instrument of the state. But I just wanted to chime in, because the wheels were spinning in my head thinking about what you were saying.
Yeah, Danny, I think that's actually really interesting, because I'm also reading a book similar about anti-Semitism in schools, and talking about how sort of like the Jewish student unions at schools are really great for the individual schools. But oftentimes it feels like they're, pitting students against each other. Like, how can we make our club better than the one at this other school? And so I think that because they keep a lot of those clubs and those groups separated by schools and not really fostering a relationship between, Jewish students across the entire district, for example, it prevents them from being able to use their collective voice to fight against, like Danny was saying, racism, or like I'm saying anti-Semitism, or the climate crisis, or, whatever sort of thing your club is fighting for. So I think that from the district, it'd be awesome if there were more opportunities to connect students together, to sort of make it feel like they're not working against each other, but more working with each other to really achieve the same goal that they're all working for.
That's great.
I was going to say, Vic, can I add on to what JJ and Danny said? Something I thought about earlier when JJ was talking. I do, like, specifically, so with the Vision project that we're working on, obviously all the work is being done within our school. And I do think it is interesting with PPS, because although they've done a lot of really great work, and especially more than other districts, and we have a lot of great programs, kind of agreeing with what JJ said, it doesn't always feel like there's much space for students to get involved. And especially like with our project, we were always kind of really on edge, because it felt like there was a lot of criticism from adults. And I mean, obviously we got a lot of support too, but it did sometimes feel like that criticism came from people not really believing that students could actually get things done and run projects. And so that was definitely pretty frustrating. And I think kind of like what Danny said, kind of redesigning the school system to allow like student voices in making decisions is really important, because how it is kind of set up right now, it's oftentimes does feel kind of performative. And even when student voices are incorporated, it feels like they're not really taken into account. So that's definitely something that can be really frustrating. And I imagine a lot of you have probably dealt with too. So I don't know, I just wanted to add that in.
This is great. I'm seeing a lot of questions pop into the chat. I just want to get one more in here, and then maybe Riley, I'll toss it to you. But Isa, I know that you you founded an environmental club at your school, and I'm kind of curious what that looked like, but specifically, you know, how you went about recruiting and encouraging other students to join and be part of that with you, and also as sort of a second part of that question, if you did have support from a teacher or an administrator, you know, what was that support, and how did it help?
Yeah, so I first thought of starting the environmental club last year towards the end of the school year, which I think was like the perfect time to start thinking about it, because it gave me time over to the second.
This is honestly better Zoom etiquette than I'm used to. You all are great. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I was talking about how starting at the end of the school year was probably the best time to start it, and because it gave me time over the summer to reach out to students who I thought would be interested and kind of start a group chat and get to know each other. And we kind of had like 4 people who were pretty consistently attending, and then there were like about 10 or so other students who showed up towards the beginning. I think maybe lost interest towards like the middle of the year, and then so we're trying to come up with ideas to make it easier and more interesting for students to keep coming back next year, because we had the group of 4 that consistently came and worked on projects because we had that connection with each other. And so I think it really is just getting to know people and having that trust going into it that really helps. And I would say with the advisor, I reached out to her towards the end of the school year last year, and she was willing to be an advisor, and she's been really helpful with like reaching out to other organizations. So she's the one who actually got me and a couple other students involved with Our Future. And she's been helping with like reaching out to the district to see if we can get compost bins and doing that sort of work. So we've been more on the side of doing the volunteer work and implementing the project in the school, like in the cafeteria, and reaching out to other students. And then she's been more of the outside advocacy.
Right on. Okay. Cool. I see a follow-up right now for Isa, but I'm gonna give it to Riley, and I'm gonna let you sift through some of these great questions.
There's so many, it's so hard to choose. But I'm gonna start with one from Juliet about what do you think about starting education about climate change or climate justice earlier, like before high school and middle school? Because some of you have talked about climate issues at very young ages. I mean, that was unheard of when I was your age. So I'd be curious to know the answer to that also. Anyone want to pop in?
I can talk about that. I think to start, the answer to that question is yes. Without question. I know I've heard from some people like the idea that has the potential to scare little kids, or but I know I never felt that way. I know climate change is a really big issue, and it is scary. But I also believe that there are really effective ways of talking about the issue in a productive way, where it's not something that's this massive mountain that you literally cannot climb, because climate change has solutions and we know what they are, and the challenge right now is implementing them. And I think regardless of what age you are, it is possible to understand that we have this issue and that we're trying to solve it. And I think when you start to have at least a basic understanding of the issue of like, when we release this type of chemical, it contains heat within the atmosphere, which is bad for a lot of things. That can start to sort of foster an interest in that type of science and that type of action. And that's sort of the other part of it is action. And I think in terms of curriculum, to go back to what Danny was saying earlier, if we can have kids do something, regardless of what it is, even right, having a boatload of kindergartners write letters to elected officials can be really powerful, and they can feel like they're doing something. There are opportunities for action there, and I think that is the key to that issue.
Okay, that's so great. And Liam, I had you down as a possible speaker to the question, how do you manage climate anxiety? And I think maybe you just touched on that action. So I love that.
Anyone else want to add to that question? That was so well put. I love it. I'm going to ask a question from earlier, and I know we've kind of touched on some of this with the climate, the climate march and the climate fair that we've had and some of our other activities, but this is from Shannon Oliver, who is our friend in Colorado. So I think it's a really neat interstate connection. For any of you, have you participated in specific events or activities that brought in a wide range of individuals? He's asking for some high school students trying to get this conversation started and going in their community and just trying to get more than just their immediate friends to show up. And I know that's the case, I think, a lot closer to home too.
Yeah, I think like I had mentioned before, making that phone call or that text message to a stranger that's kind of like, do you want to help organize this? Is the best way to, not only get people involved, but also like make a new friend. That's kind of how my friendship with Liam started. Liam and I were working on Portland Youth Climate Summit together. And then one day Liam had sort of said something about being interested in joining Portland Youth Climate Strike. And after a meeting, I was like, you should totally apply. And, now Liam and I have gotten really close and been able to become friends in and outside of organizing spaces. So I think that first initial text of like, hey, I'd love for you to help with this, or just asking your friends to, like, it really isn't one single person that's able to put on some large event. Like getting as many people as possible to help engage individuals is really important, because a friend of a friend of a friend could be someone that would be really beneficial to the work that you're doing. And then also connecting with community organizations is another sort of easier way, with like pre-established names in the community. So like, for example, Fridays for Future, which is Greta Thunberg's organization, is starting to expand into the United States. And Fridays for Future Portland has been really awesome for Portland Youth Climate Strike, because, they've got a whole list of contacts and names. So we just kind of said like, hey, we're planning the strike and we'd love for some support. And they were instantly like, yes, like, thank God someone is finally, reaching out to us. We've been wanting to start working in Portland for so long. And we were put into connection with them, who put us into a whole bunch of different people. So just really getting over that, normal teenage social anxiety of like, I don't want to reach out to a new person, and just doing that and reaching out to those organizations and those individuals who could be beneficial to your organizing work is I would say the best way to expand your audience and your sort of organizing realm.
Chloe, do you mind if I put you on the spot a little bit and ask you to answer this one? I'm just thinking of your, you mentioned that you live in a more conservative community. So do you have sort of a question or an answer to it from your perspective?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Oh, to this question, sorry. I thought
Yes,
you had
please.
another
Sorry, I
question.
did not specify. How do you get people engaged?
Yeah, I think that to me, messaging's probably the most important thing, right? So we have an end goal of emitting less carbon, right? So I think focusing on what your goals are. Jerry and I's goal was, how are we going to have energy in the district be green, be clean, right? That was our goal. Secretly, it's not secretly, but Jerry and I's main goal, right, is to combat climate change. But just understanding the messaging of how you're propagating what you want to accomplish in your area is super important to me. Is this financially good for the district? Is this being good stewards of the bond? Are taxpayers and the community, are they going to agree with their money being spent this way? So instead of phrasing it, here's what we're doing to help stop climate change, instead of maybe saying something like, this is going to save us electricity bills every month, right? So focusing on that, changing maybe your messaging or the dialogue. People want different things, but if you can focus on, to me, I think saving people money, everyone likes that. Everyone can agree on that. So it's unfortunate, but sometimes you might have to do away with that true passion of why you're pursuing something and instead focus on the end goal of, I want to get this done. What are they going to see that's going to incentivize them to do this as well? So maybe it's financial, or maybe it's just something that community supports. So finding that common ground and editing that messaging so everyone can agree on getting to that end goal is what I'd advise.
That's awesome. Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna ask one more question. We're like almost at time, and we do have just like some quick announcements at the end. So we're gonna go like 5 minutes over, if that's cool. If anyone needs to drop, you're welcome to. But I just thought we should ask this one. This is another one from Juliet. Thank you. It feels like a nice like mic drop moment. Do you have thoughts on how to ensure that climate activism includes and is led by groups that are disproportionately impacted by climate change, such as Indigenous communities? Super easy, right? Who wants to go?
I could add to that if that's good with everyone.
Get it, girl.
I guess like again with the vision project, that's definitely something that we've thought about a lot. And I guess one of the biggest like things we've thought about in that process is inclusion and making sure that we can make climate activism and involvement in our school more accessible. And so for our project, if we get the grant, our plan is to hire students to spend time right after school working on designing the curriculum and also having listening sessions and all kinds of surveying and stuff. And so I think just the biggest thing is like sometimes, especially in Portland, climate activism and climate justice focused groups can be very white and like mainly from wealthier neighborhoods or wealthier schools. And so I think that definitely kind of is a big blind spot in a lot of activism. And I think just making it more accessible and like something we thought about a lot is, bringing climate activism opportunities to schools where students already be and not making them spend too much time outside of school or having to get places or because that can be difficult for a lot of people can be really important because in the classroom is a really great opportunity for students from all different backgrounds to kind of collaborate with each other and kind of get more comfortable talking about climate change and climate justice. Because that's another thing too, is that a lot of people might not be comfortable getting involved in activism if they don't feel like there's a space for them or they don't feel like, maybe they don't feel like they know enough about it. And so, I don't know, just kind of making everyone feel welcome and everyone understanding that we're all experiencing the climate crisis and everyone, something we've talked about on our project is we're kind of all experts on the climate crisis because we're all experiencing the impacts of climate change. and just making sure that people don't feel like they're being left out, and just creating spaces for different people to join.
I love that. We're all experts because we're all living and feeling it. Anybody else want to add anything?
Yeah, I know Danny's done a bunch of work on that, so I wish you could talk about that. But I know I've been looking a little bit into PYCS, looking more into that internally. But I know something that we've been dealing with is making sure that we are really careful about having activists from marginalized communities be there as activists and not as performers. Like we don't want to be, I'm forgetting the word, we want people to be people and not we don't want to feel in any way like we have to put on a show, because that is a bad idea, I think. So anyway, my point is that we're looking into options for diversifying right now. We also, on a larger scale, I want to agree with Lucy on that. I think we have a lot of options in terms of outreach to different schools and different communities that we need to capitalize on.
That's great. And if y'all didn't see in the chat, Danny had to hop off and join a PPS policy meeting. He is certainly very busy and doing good work. I think that's it for questions today, Ari. So go on ahead and wrap us up.
Wow. Okay, I will do that. I just want to just profoundly thank these amazing panelists. You all have just spoken so eloquently about the world we're living in, the work that you all do. I'm just beyond amazed and grateful for everything, for your time, for being here, and for everything that you've done in all of your respective communities. I'm not going to put up the final slide with just a couple of announcements because you can't click on those links anyway. We will send those links out in an email, but I did just want to mention two things that are opportunities for students in particular. One is for PPS students, what Danny mentioned about the board needing 2 student representatives to be on the climate crisis policy committee, which is sort of the oversight committee. The policy specifically states that out of those 9 members on that committee every year, 2 of them will be students, and applications are open right now. So we'll get that link out to you guys in case anyone's interested. The other thing that would be for any of you is that I've been working on a project with Lewis and Clark. They Lewis and Clark College, they have a grant to create a brand new course that would be taught for both high school and college students, basically called Becoming a Community Climate Leader. And they're looking for some paid high school students who could be available this summer to help create the content for that course. And they would be thrilled if any of you were able to join that group. So I'll include that in materials we send out to you also, and would love it if any of you are interested. We'll also have all of our contact information too, so you can reach out to any of us to kind of get more personally connected to either of those opportunities, if that works better for you. And with that, I'll just ask if the panelists, if you guys can stay on for 1 extra minute. We just want to chat about one extra thing. And to everybody else, thank you so much for joining you know, for being present and listening, asking questions, and being part of this event. Thank you.
Yeah, feel free to turn on your cameras and wave. It's nice to see faces. I will stop the recording.